New York City, September 1947. 18-year-old Grace Kelly stood outside the American Academy of Dramatic Arts holding her 7th rejection letter in 6 months. The words were burned into her memory. Miss Kelly lacks the natural charisma and emotional range required for professional acting. We recommend she pursue other interests. Grace had been rejected by Juilliard, rejected by the neighborhood playhouse, rejected by every prestigious acting school in New York. Teachers told her she was too stiff, too cold, too ordinary-looking to ever succeed as an actress. Her father had been right when he said acting was a foolish dream for a Philadelphia socialite. Grace was about to give up and return home in defeat when she noticed a small advertisement in the back of a theater magazine: Sanford Meisner Advanced Acting Technique, Serious Students Only. Most aspiring actors had never heard of Sanford Meisner. His classes were held in a cramped studio above a delicatessen, far from the glamorous schools that had rejected Grace. But Grace Kelly was desperate. This unknown teacher was her last chance. What Grace didn't know was that Sanford Meisner would not only accept her, he would completely transform her approach to acting and turn her into one of the most authentic performers of her generation. The teacher who saw potential where everyone else saw failure would give Grace Kelly the tools she needed to win an Oscar, marry a prince, and become an immortal icon. But first, he would have to break down every acting habit Grace had ever learned and rebuild her from nothing. To understand the magnitude of Grace Kelly's transformation, you need to understand just how thoroughly she had been rejected by the acting establishment. Grace's journey to New York had begun with such hope and confidence. She was the daughter of a wealthy Philadelphia family, educated at the finest schools, trained in dance and music from childhood. She had starred in school plays at the prestigious Ravenhill Academy and received standing ovations. Grace truly believed that her privileged background and classical training would make her acceptance at top acting schools a formality. She was devastatingly wrong. Her first audition was at the Juilliard School in February 1947. Grace prepared meticulously, choosing a dramatic monologue from Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet that she had performed successfully in school. Grace walked onto the stage of Juilliard's audition room feeling confident and prepared. She delivered Juliet's balcony scene with the perfect diction and refined gestures she had been taught at Ravenhill. The response was immediate and crushing. "Miss Kelly," said Professor Margaret Harrison, the head of Juilliard's acting program, "your performance is technically competent but completely devoid of genuine emotion. You're reciting words beautifully, but you're not feeling anything. Acting requires vulnerability and truth, not just pretty pronunciation." Grace was shocked. "But I've been acting since I was 12, she protested. "I've won awards for my performances." Professor Harrison's expression was not unkind, but it was firm. "Miss Kelly, what you've been doing is not acting. It's elegant recitation. Professional acting requires you to access real emotions and live truthfully in imaginary circumstances. I don't see evidence that you're capable of that level of authenticity." Grace left Juilliard feeling confused and hurt. How could her years of training and natural talent be dismissed so easily? She decided that Professor Harrison was simply too demanding. Grace would find another school that would appreciate her refined approach to performance. But the pattern continued at every institution Grace approached. At the neighborhood playhouse, the audition instructor told Grace that she was performing at the audience rather than living in the moment. At HB Studio, they said she was too concerned with looking beautiful to risk the messiness that real acting requires. At the Lee Strasberg Theater Institute, Grace was told that she lacked the emotional courage necessary for method acting. Each rejection stung more than the last because they all identified the same fundamental problem. Grace Kelly was not a genuine actress. She was a well-trained performer who could hit her marks and speak clearly, but she couldn't access or convey real human emotion. The most devastating critique came from Professor James Davidson at the American Academy of Dramatic Arts. After Grace's audition, Professor Davidson sat her down for what he called an honest conversation about your future. "Miss Kelly," he said gently, "you come from privilege and it shows in everything you do. You've never had to struggle, never had to fight for anything, never experienced the kind of pain that great acting requires. You're beautiful and poised, but those qualities will only take you so far. Great actresses need to be able to access the full range of human experience: joy, pain, fear, rage, desperation. You've lived such a sheltered life that you simply don't have access to those emotions." Grace tried to argue. "But I can learn. I can study and practice." Professor Davidson shook his head. Miss Kelly, some things can't be taught. You either have the capacity for emotional truth, or you don't. And frankly, I don't believe you do. You'd be much better suited for modeling or social work, something that makes use of your natural poise without requiring genuine emotional depth. Grace left that meeting feeling completely defeated. 7 schools had essentially told her the same thing: she was too privileged, too sheltered, too superficial to ever become a real actress. For 3 weeks in September 1947, Grace seriously considered giving up her acting dreams and returning to Philadelphia. Her parents certainly encouraged this decision. John B. Kelly Sr. had always been skeptical of Grace's acting ambitions, believing that his daughter should focus on finding a suitable husband from their social circle. "Grace, darling," her mother said during one of their phone calls, "perhaps it's time to be realistic about your limitations. You have so many other wonderful qualities. Why not focus on those instead?" Grace almost listened to that advice. She had her bags half packed when she spotted the advertisement for Sanford Meisner's classes. Grace had never heard of Sanford Meisner, but something about the ad intrigued her. Unlike the other schools that promised glamour and connections, Meisner's advertisement was stark and serious. Advanced acting technique, serious students only, no shortcuts, no guarantees, only truth. Grace decided she had nothing left to lose. Sanford Meisner's studio was located above Rubens' Delicatessen on West 48th Street. Grace climbed 2 flights of narrow stairs and found herself in a small, cramped room with folding chairs arranged in a circle and nothing on the walls except a handwritten sign that read, "Reality in acting is not what you think it is." Grace was 15 minutes early for her appointment, but she was not alone. About a dozen other aspiring actors sat in the folding chairs, all of them looking as nervous as she felt. At exactly 3 p.m., a compact man in his early 40s entered the room. He had intense dark eyes and moved with the focused energy of someone who never wasted emotion. "I'm Sanford Meisner," he said without preamble. "If you're here because you think acting is glamorous or because you want to be famous, you're in the wrong place. I teach a technique that will strip away everything false about your personality until you can live truthfully under imaginary circumstances. It's difficult, it's often painful, and most of you won't be able to do it." Grace was intrigued. This was nothing like the polished presentations she had experienced at other schools. "Before we begin," Meisner continued, "I want each of you to tell me why you think you want to be an actor, and I want you to tell me the truth, not what you think I want to hear." Grace listened as other students gave answers about loving theater and wanting to tell important stories. When her turn came, she took a deep breath and decided to be completely honest. "I want to be an actress because I need to prove that I'm more than just a pretty face from a wealthy family," Grace said quietly. "Everyone says I'm too privileged and too sheltered to understand real human emotion. Maybe they're right, but I want to find out for myself." Meisner studied Grace for a long moment. "At least you're honest about your limitations," he said finally. "That's more than most people who walk through that door." For the next hour, Meisner put the prospective students through a series of exercises that were unlike anything Grace had ever experienced in acting classes. Instead of asking them to perform monologues or scenes, Meisner had them do simple repetition exercises where they repeated each other's words while trying to really see and respond to the person across from them. "Don't think," Meisner kept saying. "Don't perform. Don't try to be interesting. Just listen to the other person and respond truthfully to what you actually observe." Grace found the exercises frustrating at first. She kept trying to make her responses more dramatic or interesting, and Meisner kept stopping her. "Miss Kelly," he said after the 4th interruption, "you're performing again. You're trying to show me how good you are instead of just being present with your partner. Can you stop trying to impress me and just exist in this moment?" Grace tried to follow his instruction, but it was difficult. Her entire acting training had been about projecting and performing. Meisner was asking her to do the opposite, to be small, real, present. At the end of the session, Meisner asked to speak with Grace privately. "Miss Kelly," he said, "those other schools were right about some things. You are performing at the world rather than living in it. You do use your beauty and poise as shields to keep people from seeing what's really inside you." Grace's heart sank. This was going to be another rejection. "However," Meisner continued, "I think you have the potential to become a genuine actress if you're willing to do the work. And by work, I mean the hardest work you've ever done in your life. I mean breaking down every defense you've ever built and learning to be vulnerable in front of other people." Grace looked up with surprise. "You'll accept me into your classes?" "I'll accept you on one condition," Meisner said. "You have to promise me that you'll stop trying to be the person you think you should be and start discovering who you actually are. Can you do that?" Grace nodded, though she wasn't entirely sure what he meant. "Good," Meisner said. "We start Monday. Be prepared to fail. Be prepared to look foolish. Be prepared to discover things about yourself that you've been hiding from for 18 years. Grace Kelly's real acting education was about to begin. Meisner's technique was based on a simple but revolutionary idea. Authentic acting came from genuine human connection, not from performed emotion or technical skill. In Grace's first official class, Meisner paired her with another student, a young man named David Chen who had grown up poor on the Lower East Side of Manhattan. "I want you to look at each other," Meisner instructed Grace and David, "and tell each other what you observe, not what you think, not what you imagine, what you actually see." Grace looked at David and said, "You have brown eyes." David looked back and said, "You seem nervous." "Repeat what he said," Meisner told Grace. "I seem nervous," Grace repeated. "Now respond to that truthfully," Meisner said. Grace paused, feeling the eyes of the entire class on her. Her instinct was to deny being nervous, to maintain her composed exterior. But Meisner had asked for truth. "I am nervous," Grace said quietly. "I'm terrified that I'm going to fail at this like I've failed at everything else." The room fell silent. It was the first time Grace had ever admitted vulnerability in front of strangers. "Good," Meisner said simply. "That was real. Now let's see if you can stay connected to that truth while we continue the exercise." For the next 2 hours, Grace and David continued the repetition exercise, responding to each other's words and actions with increasing honesty and spontaneity. At first, Grace felt exposed and uncomfortable. She was accustomed to hiding her real feelings behind a mask of polite composure. But as the exercise continued, something shifted. Grace began to actually see David as a person rather than just another student. She noticed the way his eyes lit up when he smiled, the slight tremor in his voice when he talked about his fears, the genuine kindness in his responses to her own admissions of insecurity. And for the first time in her life, Grace forgot about how she looked or whether she was performing correctly. She was simply present, responding honestly to another human being. When the class ended, Grace felt emotionally drained, but also strangely exhilarated. "How was that different from your other acting training?" Meisner asked her. Grace thought for a moment. "It felt real," she said finally, "like I was actually connecting with another person instead of just trying to impress an audience." "Exactly," Meisner said. "That's the foundation of everything we're going to do here, real connection between real people, even when the circumstances are imaginary." Grace's training with Meisner continued for 18 months and became the most transformative experience of her life. Meisner's classes were unlike anything Grace had ever experienced. There were no scripts at first, no costumes, no stages. Just a room full of folding chairs where students learned to see each other clearly and respond truthfully. The repetition exercises became increasingly complex. Meisner would add emotional stakes, imaginary circumstances, and conflicting objectives. But the fundamental principle remained the same: respond truthfully to what the other person is actually doing. Grace struggled initially because her entire personality had been built around control and composure. Meisner's technique required her to give up control and allow herself to be genuinely affected by other people. "Miss Kelly," Meisner said during her 3rd week of classes, "you're still editing yourself. You're still deciding what's appropriate to feel and what's not. I need you to stop being a lady and start being a human being." This was perhaps the most difficult instruction Grace had ever received. She had been raised to be a lady above all else, composed, appropriate, never showing strong emotion or losing control. But Meisner was asking her to do exactly the opposite. The breakthrough came during Grace's 8th week of training. Meisner had set up an improvisation where Grace was supposed to be waiting for news about whether she had gotten into college. Her scene partner, David, was playing her father who had just received a phone call with the results. Grace sat in the folding chair trying to access appropriate nervousness about college acceptance. David entered the imaginary scene and Grace could see immediately from his expression that the news was bad. "Gracie," David said gently, "I just heard from admissions. They said no." Grace's first instinct was to respond with polite disappointment, the kind of restrained reaction she had been taught was appropriate for young ladies. But something about David's genuinely sympathetic expression, something about the kindness in his voice, broke through Grace's defenses. Suddenly, Grace wasn't thinking about the imaginary college rejection. She was thinking about all the real rejections she had experienced. From Juilliard, from the neighborhood playhouse, from every acting school that had told her she wasn't good enough. Grace began to cry. Not delicate, ladylike tears, but deep, body-shaking sobs that came from months of suppressed disappointment and fear. David, staying in character as her father but responding to Grace's real emotion, sat down beside her and put his arm around her shoulders. "It's okay, sweetheart," he said softly. "This doesn't mean you're not talented. This doesn't mean you should give up." Grace looked up at David through her tears and saw not just her scene partner but a person who genuinely cared about her feelings. The connection between them was completely real, even though the circumstances were imaginary. "That," Meisner said when the improvisation ended, "was acting. Everything else you've done before today was just playing dress-up." From that moment forward, Grace's work in class changed dramatically. She stopped trying to perform emotions and started allowing herself to be genuinely affected by the other people in her scenes. Her scene partners noticed the difference immediately. Grace was no longer the beautiful, untouchable socialite they had met on the first day of class. She was vulnerable, present, real. "It's like watching a completely different person," David told Grace after one particularly intense scene. "You're actually there now. You're actually with us." Grace's transformation extended beyond the classroom. In her daily life, she began to notice things she had never seen before. The way strangers' faces changed when they were happy or sad, the way people's voices revealed their true feelings, the thousands of small human moments that happened around her every day. She was learning to see the world the way an actor must see it, with complete attention to human behavior and emotion. After 12 months of training with Meisner, Grace felt ready to audition for professional work. But Meisner warned her that the transition from classroom to professional auditions would be challenging. "Miss Kelly," he said during one of their last classes together, "you've learned to be truthful in the safety of this room with people who know and trust you. Now you have to learn to be equally truthful in front of strangers who are judging you for jobs. That's much harder." Grace's first professional audition was for a small role in a Broadway play. She prepared using Meisner's techniques, focusing on genuine connection with her scene partner rather than trying to impress the director. The audition went well, but Grace didn't get the part. The second audition was for a television drama. Again, Grace used everything Meisner had taught her about truthful response and genuine emotion. Again, she didn't get the part. After 6 months of rejections, Grace began to worry that even Meisner's training couldn't overcome whatever fundamental limitations she had as an actress. But Meisner encouraged her to keep working. "Miss Kelly," he said, "you're a completely different actress than you were 18 months ago. The work you're doing now is honest and compelling. The right opportunity will come." That opportunity came in 1950, when Grace auditioned for a small role in a film called 14 Hours. The casting director was looking for an actress to play a young woman who witnesses a suicide attempt and is emotionally affected by the experience. Grace prepared for the audition by using Meisner's technique to connect with the imaginary circumstances. She thought about how she would really feel if she witnessed someone in crisis, and she allowed herself to be genuinely moved by that imaginary experience. During the audition, Grace's response to the dramatic situation was so authentic and compelling that the director rewrote the scene to give her character more screen time. "Miss Kelly," the director said after the audition, "that was one of the most truthful performances I've ever seen in an audition room. When can you start filming?" Grace Kelly's professional career had begun. The rest of Grace's story is Hollywood legend. From 14 Hours she moved to larger roles in High Noon and Mogambo, eventually working with Alfred Hitchcock and winning the Academy Award for Best Actress. But Grace never forgot the foundation that Sanford Meisner had given her. In her Oscar acceptance speech in 1955, Grace thanked the teacher who taught me that acting is not about being perfect, it's about being truthful. Grace continued to use Meisner's techniques throughout her career even after she became Princess of Monaco and retired from acting. "Everything I learned about human behavior, about really seeing people, about being present in difficult moments. I learned from Sanford," Grace told a friend years later. "He didn't just make me a better actress, he made me a better person." Sanford Meisner watched Grace Kelly's rise to fame with quiet satisfaction. He had seen potential where everyone else saw only limitations, and he had been proven right. But for Meisner, Grace's success was not about vindication. It was about the validation of his core belief that any person willing to do the hard work of emotional honesty could learn to be a genuine actor. Grace Kelly became a great actress. Meisner said in an interview years later, not because she was naturally talented, but because she was willing to give up everything false about herself and discover what was true. That's the only way real acting happens. The schools that had rejected Grace Kelly watched her success with varying degrees of regret and amazement. Professor Harrison from Juilliard later admitted that she had made an error in judgment. Miss Kelly proved that technique without truth is meaningless, she said, but also that truth without technique can be developed. I was wrong to dismiss her so quickly. But perhaps the most important impact of Grace Kelly's story was on other aspiring actors who had been told they lacked talent or natural ability. Grace's transformation from rejected wannabe to Oscar-winning star proved that acting ability was not an inborn gift available only to a chosen few. With the right training, the right teacher, and the willingness to do difficult emotional work, almost anyone could learn to be a compelling performer. Grace Kelly's story became legendary in acting schools around the world, not as an example of natural talent triumphing, but as proof that dedication and authentic technique could overcome any limitation. The young woman who had been told she was too cold, too stiff, and too ordinary had become one of the most beloved actresses in cinema history. And it all started with one teacher who was willing to see potential where everyone else saw only problems, and one student who was brave enough to give up everything she thought she knew about herself in order to discover who she really was. Grace Kelly's journey from rejection to Oscar proves that the most important audition is not the one that gets you the part, it's the one where you finally find the courage to be completely authentically yourself. If this story inspired you, share it with others who've been told they're not good enough. Hit that subscribe button, and let us know in the comments about times when someone believed in you when nobody else did. Don't miss our next video where we reveal other celebrities who were rejected before becoming superstars, stories that prove persistence and the right mentor can overcome any obstacle. Remember, your failures don't define your limits. They define your starting point. Grace Kelly's transformation proves that with the right guidance and enough courage, anyone can become extraordinary.